Welcome to another HACSU vodcast, your health and community services union, as we continue our chat with Paramedic and HACSU delegate Cam Johnson. If you missed the previous episode,
it just needs to be rectified, because if we don't do anything on the current trajectory, like when I'm 70, we won't have a health system. We won't have people that want to work in health system, because it'll be such a stressful, high pressure environment with zero support. And if we don't do something now, then that's what's going to happen. Simple as that. And you'll be lucky if you get an ambulance at all. And people will be throwing people in cars and taking them to the hospital themselves and waiting for 5 hours even just to get through the front doors. That's not what we want to get to. We need to fix it. We need to fix it now.
If you'd like to check it out in full, you can do that at the HACSU website or on the socials. But right now, here's part 2. The ongoing results of ramping. So next year they're hoping to, or within 12 months, to reduce that to 45 minutes and then the following year 30. Is that realistic, do you think?
Look, we're seeing improvement. It's not drastically better, and I'd like to see the data. I'm just going anecdotally. To reduce it by 15 minutes next year without any investment whatsoever is going to make it probably pretty hard, and we'll probably see really no change, if anything. It's just a time. It's just a time for the escalation process. So it doesn't necessarily mean patients will be handed over. HACSU ambulance sub-branch members were never going to be put in the position where they were going to drop a patient off their stretcher in the corridor and leave. That's not the intent of the procedure.
And I think sometimes with scare campaigns, that's what's being said and circulated.
There's no way we could ask members to do that, let alone any members doing that at risk of their own registration. And that's not how we treat patients. But it is a procedure that needs to be complied with. But we understand that whilst there is a lack of investment in the hospital, there's going to be some extended waits. But as I said, we're not running our own ward anymore, which is a great start. We're ramping in the corridor, which is not ideal, but there's some ongoing work with that to try and make it as best as we can. It is what it is. And if it's necessary, then ramping in ambulances themselves for the patient on a case-by-case basis is an option. The example I use there is someone that's anxious or has autism or something that needs a quieter environment. That might be more appropriate. It's not routine, but that's an option. So it is better that we're not running our own ward. We're not kind of getting embedded in the hospital and expected to be essentially a surge workforce. But they need to invest a lot more, because if you just want to make it 45 minutes next year and 30 minutes the year after, you need to actually put some substance behind it, and that's more beds and more staff inside the hospital that we can hand over to.
I've always thought that people that work in the healthcare system, they're just uniquely incredible people. It isn't for everyone, and it is full on what you do. So the thought that we're losing paramedics in this instance, that is just so alarming.
Crazy.
What is the feeling amongst...
I've never seen a workforce so angry and so upset. It's on a daily basis we're getting approached as delegates. We get approached all the time, but it's no one's worried about the pay issue anymore. No one's worried about the entitlement that they supposedly should get. It's about patient safety. It's about ramping. It's about the lack of support and backups. The lack of intensive care paramedics on shift, the lack of other support services within the ambulance service like educators. They're angry, and this newer generation as well, they are not tolerating it. They don't tolerate being treated like a bum on a seat. They don't tolerate running from the start of the shift to the end and missing meal breaks and then doing an extra 1 to 2 hours of overtime. How do they deal with it? They get angry. They tell us. We try and tell the service and we try and tell the government, but ultimately we'll lose them. And these are some smart cats that we need to have driving ambulances and attending to people, because to get into a university course in paramedicine these days takes a lot of brain power, because they're very high tertiary entrance scores needed to get in. So these are people that we want to keep, and we want to train properly and have running around the community and attending to everyone and doing the very best they can and not being stuck. Driving all over the countryside because there's no ambulances at Tribunna for one night, or getting stuck in the hospital because there's no beds available.
I've heard reports that with the solo drive or the solo paramedics, they get there, obviously it's an emergency, they've got no one in the back with the patient, so they're driving themselves to the emergency department, having to continually look back and check on, which is dangerous in itself.
Crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
How can that be?
But this is why people are angry, is because they're put in those positions where they have to make those decisions, and you wouldn't do that if you were perfectly normal and sane. And we're not saying we're insane. We're just saying that we're put under the pump and we're put in positions where you have to get that patient to the hospital, because waiting around for an hour for the backup crew, which might be coming from Tribunna, because that's the only one available, is not good for the patient either. And or having no access to intensive care paramedics to do a particular skill, then you've got to load them up and take them to the hospital. And they're getting angry, and it's putting people in difficult positions. It jeopardises their well-being greatly. It jeopardises their individual registration requirements as well, because they're making decisions that they would make normally. And in some instances, they're making decisions that would be contrary to policy. So it's a desperate situation, and we're seeing this 50% of staffing on a night shift on a regular basis. So it's half the crews available, and I dare say half of those crews are single. So now I'm backing up a single officer from Kingston going out to Brighton. So I've spent 40 minutes driving, like doing nothing really, to get out there just to drive them back in, because they need someone to drive so they can sit in the back and monitor the ECG because the patient's having chest pain. It's ridiculously inefficient, and it's frustrating, and it's dangerous.
So Cam, looking back over the last 20 years as a paramedic, 20 plus years, what has that been like for you personally? Just on the nature of the work, I think the ones that spring to mind in the front of your brain very quickly are the particularly tragic ones. I think there's some sights and sounds and smells that will never leave you, and we bear that burden, I guess. There's nothing that keeps me up at night. I've been quite lucky in my career. I've worked with some good people, and jobs don't always go according to plan, but you can always leave thinking that you've done the best you can. Good news cases. I have had a successful resuscitation, and that was. It's almost surreal. It's someone that had a cardiac arrest in front of me and my partner, and we defibrillated them, and they immediately woke up and said, "What just happened?" And they had some chest pain prior to it. It was a heart attack, and because we did a bit of CPR on them, the first thing I asked was, "How's your chest pain?" He goes, "Oh, it's a bit different." I think from the compressions. So that sticks to mind. It's almost like watching a TV show. I was just thinking of that.
It's just crazy, and to see that those therapies work, if you're there and if you're on time, that's the critical part there. Makes it all worthwhile. It's when we get there at the 10-minute mark or the 15-minute mark, and it's made very difficult because there's been too much damage from that cardiac arrest to resuscitate. I think any job I get satisfaction, and I think still doing it 22 years later, you get that feeling of doing a good job for any patient where you affect some form of positive change. And obviously we get called mostly because people are in pain or they're nauseated, or they're having some symptoms that might indicate a more serious medical episode. And even if it's just symptom management, so giving them some pain relief or giving them something to stop their nausea, or getting them to a hospital because it might be a stroke or a heart attack, and you do a good job and you have a good interaction and the patient's appreciative, leaves you feeling great, and you'll go and do that all shift all night, no problems. The job itself does wear a bit thin though sometimes. The ramping has been a massive stressor for me over the years, to the point I've reached out and sought professional help to try and manage the emotions about ramping and the issues that flow on from ramping, like the patient safety issues, the work health safety issues, interpersonal issues. The odd client you go to that's quite rude certainly doesn't build resilience. It kind of chews away at you from time to time. But luckily those patients are few and far between. And people affected by drugs and alcohol usually not too happy to see us. But again, with a good partner and a good boss, it's kind of part of the job really, and it can be managed. And overall, I think the good outweighs the bad, which is probably why I'm still here. And as a delegate, the next thing for me is to have that role where I support members in a job that is fairly unique, and have an understanding of what is the problem and what we can do to alleviate it, whether it's an industrial issue or whether it's just to be a mate. So, I quite like that. I quite like that role as well, helping out colleagues and the members. I do hold quite seriously and like to do that job well. So.
Cam Johnson, HACSU delegate and paramedic for over 20 years. Thank you for taking us through ramping, the issues, but also just what it's like to be a paramedic, the good, the bad, the challenging. And I really hope that we can keep people like you in this industry, because we need it. We need you. We need our paramedics as well, and even to share some understanding, hopefully, with the public too, about just what's happening, as I said, beyond the headlines and beyond the 10 seconds on TV. So thank you so much.
No dramas. Thank you for the invitation, and hopefully contributes to getting the message out that we need more staff. We need more staff in the hospital. We need more paramedics. We need more training and more support, and it is not an easy job, and it needs to be respected as such, I think. And if we can get that through the government, then great.